Okay, welcome everybody. I should be off mute on everything. So, welcome. We are starting 5 minutes early just to get those notifications out there for everybody that's joining us via LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and we will be starting at the top of the hour. So, if you're listening to a recording of this, please skip ahead to about the 5 minute point, and that's where we'll start the introduction. We'll start talking, and we'll see if we have people joining us. I'm watching the comments right now. If you do join us early, go ahead and leave a comment, say hello, tell us what your week was. So we will start at the top of the hour as usual. Yeah, so LinkedIn users, you can't see my responses. We're going to get started at the top of the hour, and we will see, we're starting to see people starting to comment, so welcome. Let us know if you're here, and we'll get started at the top of the hour. Hey, Alan, good to see you. Oh, excellent. Good to see you, Alan. Sinatra. Wow, that was a while back. All right, Martin, good to see you. We're going to start at the top of the hour, though, all right?
Yeah, hello.
All right, good to see people starting to join. All right, I think it's close enough to the top of the hour. Everybody's kind of staring at me. We've got Martin here joining us, so let me go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for joining us for another Cutaway Security ICS Friday Infosec chat. I'm seeing people, joining from LinkedIn. I see Alan's on LinkedIn. I see Tomcat. I see Wes and a few other people. Thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat. We can see the chat. So if you have questions, if you want to talk about your week, and we're glad to hear it. So let us know your questions, and jump right in there with your comments. Let other people understand what you think about what we're talking about. And so Martin, welcome to the show. First time you're joining on here. So usually how we do this is I just kind of talk through some of the stuff, lead the conversation, and then talk about the topics. But I want to hear about your week, Martin. So why don't we go ahead and allow you to introduce yourself real quick, and we'll come back around to the agenda and start talking about our weeks. So please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Don. I'm Martin from Switzerland. I work for Swiss. Is it's not a company. It's foundation. We are running the network for the universities, and like a small group is doing security. And there I have all the part with PLCs, HMIs, and so on, like all the OT stuff.
Okay.
And yeah, it's quiet currently. We don't have much let's say troubles. Last week was ransomware from in one university, but they were very lucky. So the how I say the bad guys couldn't get like encrypt everything. They
Right. Yeah. And I've gone to talk. I mean, there's so many different words out there. I mean, there's criminals, there's hackers, there's
yeah.
hacktivists and stuff like that. I've just taken to calling them threat actors instead of like attackers and stuff like that. Threat actors,
Okay.
because I think it encompasses it a little bit better, makes it a little bit easier to talk to. So that's just me personally. So.
Yeah, that's okay. Um, well, obviously, English not my first language, so I I take what comes to mind. Yeah. Beside that, I'm playing around a bit with the top 20 PLC.
Okay.
The coding practices, and there number 19 is interesting, whereas you monitor the PLC memory, the free memory actually,
Okay.
and it works very well. You can, if you trend it on a HMI, you see very nicely if like if you do the SSH brute force. But to make an alert out of it, without many false positives is quite difficult. I find, because the memory is kind of you have like slowly floating like up and down. So it's kind of difficult to track, and that's why kind of I hooked in when you were chatting today about Seek and Suricata and all this, which I guess we talk about later. So yeah, it's quite interesting to look at how PLCs are handling the free memory.
Oh yeah, no, and
Yeah.
that's and I put it in a link. Unfortunately, for those of you on LinkedIn, you're not going to see the links that I put into chat. It's just going out to the YouTube channel. It's just the way that LinkedIn allows the chat. So, but we've talked about. I've done a Sans ICS concept video on the top 20 PLC practices with Vivek. We're going to actually see Vivek in Vegas for DEF CON. He's giving one of the talks at the ICS Village. But it's basically a list of things that the programmers for PLCs, not necessarily, and a lot of people have this confusion when we start talking about coding practices for different types of devices. The firmware and the real-time operating systems that are running on the PLCs are one thing that do deserve secure coding practices, but typically that's associated with the normal coding practices, attack surface for those, for types of the devices. What the top 20 PLC coding practices talk about are the configuration of the programs that are running on those devices. And so you can configure those, you can write those programs in a certain way to leverage the functionality of the PLC to track certain data. Most of the time they're tracking process data, but as Martin talks about, and I guess it's number 19, there's no particular order. They don't rate them as far as criticality in order, but one of the cool things that you can do with the PLC is monitor usage, and if you monitor that usage and send that data to wherever you're storing it, the data historian, it typically is a small data set, so it doesn't necessarily have a huge impact on the PLC. Certainly Martin knows a little bit better than I do because he's implementing it, but the small data sets mean that the processing time isn't that bad on the PLC, but also the network communication is not going to be substantially increased to have a negative impact there. So certainly everything has to be tested and taken in moderation, but it's one of those things that they found is effective. And the reason why you might do that, Martin, do you want to explain it? Why would you monitor memory usage and send that to the data historian?
Yeah, like of course, if you do brute force, for example, the brute force SSH to the PLC, then you see because the PLC suddenly needs memory to handle these requests, and you can see it very nicely in the graph when you trend it or put it into a historian. The issue I have a bit with it, in the practice even is written, trend it on the HMI and check it from time to time, but who has time? I need I need an alert or something generated automatically when there is something going on, or like a deviation. So I try to do like a baseline, for example, compare the actual value to a baseline to see how that works, or rate of change. I track that value, but I'm not satisfied yet. There are too many false positive. For example, if you have a PLC with kind of built-in AHMI functionality, like a web server built-in, if you enter to the web server, then also the free memory decrease. So and that is not an attack. So have to see where it goes.
Yes, and that's that's the important part about it. This is baselining that activity. You still have to understand it. So and the applications that you have to have looking at this have to provide that alerting mechanism that you're talking about, right? The historians don't. Now, I guess you can write some code within the historian's application, or something that queries that data, but you're actually looking at it from a network traffic standpoint.
No, currently I don't know if I can share on the.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, right now,
So if you want to
I
see
don't
the
think we have
graph.
that capability. So
Okay, no
it's
problem.
StreamYard. So
I just track the free memory, and I want to generate an alert inside the PLC. Not I don't. I mean,
okay.
obviously the brute force. You should also be able to monitor with in the network. And
Mhm.
if you have their IDS or something, then you get an alert. I just focus on these top 20 practices, and see how you can implement it.
Okay, that's I think that's really interesting. Let's go back to the activities, and certainly that, this is kind of why Martin and I were talking. So part of what I did this week is actually went a bit back, a little bit more technical. So I've been working on I'm looking at Zeek, Suricata, Evebox. Actually, today I added this real quick at the end. I was looking at Brim to do analysis of the different PCAPs, understanding what the functionality that provides, and just refamiliarizing myself with these tools, from an IDS standpoint. And it just kind of drove home the reminder. And I understand this, and I teach about this all the time, and I talk about this. But I always have to get good examples and reminders are out there that IDS requires significant tuning, efficacy testing to ensure that your alerting is actually generating alerts as well. So it's not something that we can just set up and forget about, and it's not a silver bullet. The thing that came out from that for me was one of the new tools, and I might have run across this a while back, but that Trace Wrangler tool, which is a packet capture toolkit, which will basically, if you have a packet capture and you want to rewrite the data so that you can publish it, like whether it's for a CTF, or you want to give it to other people. It will do some sanitation of the information in the PCAPs, kind of like I don't want to say TCP replay because it does have that functionality, but it will obfuscate IP addresses and hardware addresses. I'm not sure about, I mean, there's still data in a PCAP that is the actual data that it probably doesn't clean up, information that's actually in the data portion of the packets, but it's a starting place. So I just called that out. Other things that we've been doing on the this week, we're on getting everything up and running for the Sands ICS Village. I've got the speaker schedule, and I'll be, right after we get off of this, finishing up the website updates. So information about the ICS Village at DEF CON should be updated either this evening or tomorrow morning. And then, personal health, working, it's, we do a lot of work. I travel a lot and stuff like that, going to the doctor, going to the dentist, going to, I've got an eyeglasses appointment. We have to take care of ourselves. I just want to put it out there, reminding everybody that we're all important. And, it's, we have to learn, or we have to remember to take care of ourselves because, it can sneak up on us. So, hey, and if you're here, if you're listening on LinkedIn, I'm watching the LinkedIn. If you're joining us a little bit late, say hello. If you have any questions about what we're talking about, comments, whether it's from YouTube or LinkedIn, we'd appreciate your input. Looks like we have somebody else joining on here. Let's see, Jake. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon.
Excellent. So why don't you, first time joining the stream, why don't you introduce yourself, sir?
I am Jake Brodsky. I'm the guy that did started the top 20 PLC programming for security thing. Blame it on me. I started that ball rolling, and then I watched it as other people picked it up and ran with it.
Well, excellent. Martin might have some questions for you. So Jake, why? Obviously, I understand why you started this, but kind of why don't you give your background on why this was important, and kind of the penetration you have seen in the industry outside of just, because information security is important, but we're support, right? And so you're actually hitting the actual people that are developing and implementing the processes. So can you kind of give us that portion of the background?
Well, the top 20 idea was actually me with a bunch of notes that I've been collecting over my career. And one of the things that I did was I just sort of gathered ideas from where I'd seen things in the field. I noticed that everybody that approaches PLC programming approaches it from a blank slate. Nobody gives you hints. Nobody says much. The manufacturers are happy to show you all the interesting features that they have, but they don't really give you recommended features. And I still see this on Reddit quite frequently where people say, I'm going to do everything in structured text. And I'm saying, oh, really? What do your timers look like? Have you tried doing a timer in structured text? What does that look like? And of course, I've done it just as a curiosity to prove that I could do it. And it's a royal mess because, when the timer kicks out, well, it goes to a different part of code and you can't follow it that easily. It's kind of like a go-to. You don't want to do that. You really don't. And those are the sorts of things that kind of get me going. And that's one of the reasons why I looked at that and I went, okay, we really need to give people guidelines on what to do with this because we've got a new crew of people coming in and they don't know the reasons why the original 1131 people did what they did. Mm-hmm. And so they look at this and they go, okay, well, this is something that this is just engineers being engineers. I'm going to write this code and it's going to look better than anything they've ever done. And what they don't realize is, dude, you're not writing this code for yourself, and it's not for your other people who appreciate the beauty of programming. You're writing this for some poor slob at 2:00 in the morning when the instrumentation's doing weird stuff, and they just want to see what effect it's having on the code. This is not a time for elegant abstraction. This is a time where you got to go in there and say, hey, folks, if you've got a template that you're using, repeat it. Do it over again. Even if that means, yes, I'm not using a subroutine. Well, if it's got IO in it, you don't do that. because if you do, then now you've got to figure out how things map in there, and then when it maps in, what does it do? You end up with watch windows all over the place, full of all kinds of interlocks and permissives, and it just drives everybody up a wall. So those are some of the things that that come into play here, and it is completely different, and I have to try and disabuse an awful lot of background that people have learned in the programming environment. And I gotta explain to them, no, abstraction isn't always a good thing here, you know.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, one of the first times that we had a situation like you talked about, and this was on the corporate side, is we're doing an incident response, looking for web shells. We were looking for a threat actor that was dropping web shells and maintaining persistence within this huge web farm, and we thought we figured out a way to identify it because he was obfuscating his code through some techniques that were available for PHP. And then we de-obfuscate them and realize, oh, it was just some developer that thought it was cool. And he wrote his plugin and then he obfuscated it with this way. So, it's these things that seem cool to people because I don't want to say they're bored, but they want to demonstrate their mental flex within the industry. But it does make it difficult for, as you mentioned, those people down the road, because how long are those people going to be there? When are they going to pass these duties off, whether they're moving up or they're moving on to other things, and somebody else has to maintain that?
Right. That's always been the issue, is that you're not going to be the person looking at this. And 9 times out of 10, that thing's been sitting there for 5-7 years. The PLC could be approaching end of life, but also so are the limit switches, or sometimes your power supply, or you've got something goofy going on in there that's causing the IO to go places that nobody ever thought it would. And that's the reason why you need to have the code look the way it does. It's better to do a whole bunch of tests, and it's better to not write this into very concise code, because I'll be honest, I learned that because I did that to myself. I actually did try and replicate the code in a pumping station, and I said, oh, well, I've got 4 instances of pumps. They're all attached to the same manifold. They've got interlocks. I'll just do each instance of pump, and that's exactly what I did. And then the time came to debug it, and I regretted everything I did. But later on, of course, it did help me a little bit. I'm not saying you should never do this.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. I mean, the whole being able to do that, like having that deep knowledge of how that works does play into troubleshooting down the road. But eventually, you got to come back around to templatizing things as much as possible so they're consistent. That consistency, and then when you have those unique situations where you have to do the deep dive, I think it's important to understand that. Martin, I know you're going through and you're implementing this stuff. You've got Jake on the right here. What questions do you have for him as you're going through and implementing this?
Currently, not really questions. I think it's awesome that that you started. We are picking up, as you said, mostly like translating it to German, and that we can, spread it under the Germany, Switzerland, Austria. All the time better to have it in the local language, and with that we try to, like adapt a bit, because we see some, let's say, differences in how you code or how you program the PLC in the US and compared to let's say Germany. Also in the industries, if you are in the process industry, is different than if you are in like machine manufacturing, so we try to adapt a bit, because the engineers using it, they like that you are how you say, talking on the same level, kind of, If I go to an automation engineer and I talk about like electricity distribution, then he might not. He will think, oh, it's not for me, It's for.
Oh yeah, and the back end infrastructure is a little different. So looking on their site, they do have translations: Arabic, Croatian, Chinese, and Spanish right now. So Martin, if you have a German version for Jake, you can get it up to him or Vivek. I'm sure they'll be looking for that. Jake, what are your thoughts around the industry standpoint about the differences there? So what is your experience there?
there's always been a cultural war between Europe and North America. In North America, we like to use relay ladder logic because, it's what we know. And yet in Europe, I know that they have different people working on PLCs, and I know that they like function block diagrams. That's a religious war that we'll never bridge. But effectively, they're both very good at what they do. And if you write a timer, it looks just as concise in function block diagram as it does in relay ladder logic. It's just a matter of trying to get it all together so that you understand, that whoever has to look at this gets a proper diagram that shows them, hey, you know what, your timer timed out, your valve took too long to move from fully open to fully closed. Those are the types of diagnostics that are great to have. But the big deal is also making sure that there are buffers where you can test things, and also buffers where we can install protocol sensitive firewalls to block things. So, for example, if you've got one of those, not to advertise, but I know Tofino does a really great job at this. They have a Modbus sensitive firewall, and you can then say, okay, I'll only let you write to this block of addresses right here, and you can only read from that block of addresses there, and you cannot have the streams shall not cross, as we said in Ghostbusters, never cross the streams. Mm-hmm. And the neat thing about that is now you can't have a situation where somebody deliberately inserts code that confuses the heck out of the controller, because you're not writing directly to a timer, you're not writing directly to a counter, or you're always writing to an intermediate piece of code in there. And that's always a great thing to do. That's another example of what we've discovered. It's not something obvious, because everybody writes a driver and they say, yeah, you can write to that counter. Why would you do that to yourself? Validate what you got. Give yourself a chance to actually make sense of whether or not this is any good. The same thing goes for a timer. If this thing has a range that you want it to time in, and you shouldn't go outside that range, then don't let them. You got to do those things.
So is there? I'm always thinking about what ways people will push back on my recommendations, and why. So having these this extra code checks in there, does it slow it down significantly? Because to me these are a bunch of conditional statements that you're adding to the code, so you're making the code a little bit more complex, a little bit longer. What's the experience there, and how do you respond to that direction?
I mean, if you're writing code that's that close to the edge in your controller, maybe you need a different controller. You should have space in the controller to add to your code. If that is not the case, then you may want to consider splitting things up a bit. I get kind of scared, this is me personally, when I see a whole plant loaded into one single PLC. That scares the hell out of me, because now you're just one power supply away from failure. Mm-hmm. And I hate to see that. I really do. I don't think anybody should do that to themselves at all. It also means that all they have to do is attack that one thing. It removes any opportunity to segment the networks, and that's always a positive thing. And you don't have to be an engineer to know that. You can easily see, hey, maybe we can replicate this in another PLC. So those are some of the ideas. This whole thing, I just collected these notes from mentors in the past, and I didn't think it was going to really hit with a big bang, and lo and behold, Dale picked up on it right away, and I was really surprised. And then next thing you know, I'm talking to Sarah Flux, and she ran with it really good, and brought in Vivek, and everybody's been really pushing this much farther than I ever thought it would go.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a responsibility now, Jake. You have a responsibility to the community, which is actually the world at this point.
I don't know about that. That's I work for a federal agency now, so I don't get involved in this. I can sit back and admire the problem a little bit. It's for me. I look at the the clients for all this, like the utilities, and I can see what they do. In fact, we're starting an effort now to go a little bit deeper into the assessments that we do. We're not doing audits. We're just doing assessments without regard to industrial standards. So NERC SIP is a thing, and we will look at a utility where NERC SIP comes along, but we're not going to actually get heavily involved in a lot of these things because we don't. It's not that we don't care about NERC SIP; it's that we're trying to go beyond it. We're trying to see what's the next thing that they should be doing, and where are they really. So when we talk about coding practices, coming back to your original question about what should we do if this adds overhead, well, it does. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, and you can't afford to do all of these things all at once. These are just this is a bag of tricks, and we can't standardize on it. We have to actually. It's kind of like teaching someone how to code in C. There are certain things that you teach them to do that are defensive things that may add a lot of time to your C program. Sorry about that, but this is how we do it,
Yeah, no, and to me, this is, I don't even want to call it due diligence. This is more of at some point you need a review. Somebody should be looking at it, and there should be certain questions that you ask. And now the answers to those questions, like we don't need it, can be there, but at least you're having the conversation. At least you're taking into consideration, especially when we're talking about the reliability and availability of the process, which is what it boils down to. Us understanding, and Martin's already talked about it, and that's been a part of my week. This is interesting information. A lot of the information that comes out from the data that's being generated by these correct code practices is extremely valuable in understanding the events that went on, which could help us understand what threat actors are doing, or it could just help us understand that there's a problem. So I think it's important to implement these things.
We do get instrumentation failures, and it's good to have a forensic method of reviewing what happened. Sometimes these things are intermittent. You could have, it doesn't happen very often, but you do see cases where fuses will have hairline cracks in them, and so sometimes your control power will disappear. This is the kind of thing where you just have to know intimately how the thing was wired and how did you get there. And then, if you start to see your process acting weird, then you have to go in there and ask them, okay, how do I change this? Or what can the controller do to understand what's going on? There is no good answer here that's perfect. Everybody's got to look at this and say, how automated do I want to make this? So that there's a lot of diagnostics to be collected. And there was one thing that we held out of the PLC programming tips that is probably forthcoming at some point, which will be I/O programming tips, I/O configuration. So there's a lot of other things that I alluded to, but I didn't actually dig into very heavily. Like, for example, putting a hardware timer on a starter motor. If you've got a line start motor, a hardware timer to say, after you shut the motor down, you can't restart it through automation without that delay. So that keeps you from hammering it and banging it, and then causing the motor to break the shaft coupling or something like that.
Yeah, that's, just some common things that would go into, I guess, attacking a process, but also, which is based on actual physics, which could occur in a real situation if somebody didn't think of that use case. So, we're coming up on the 30 minutes, and I like to stop it at those 30 minutes. Hey, Martin, I thank you for joining us. How can people get a hold of you, Martin, if they wanted to talk to you about what you're doing or anything?
Well, I'm in your Discord server.
Okay. Cutaway Security Discord. If you need an invite, just check me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I'll put it out there. Exactly. Is there anything else that you wanted to plug, Martin?
No, awesome that you do that every week. Thank you.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. And thanks for joining and talking about this. This has been excellent. Jake, how can people get a hold of you and reach out to you if they've got questions?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and if that doesn't work, well, I'm from the feds and I'm here to help. That doesn't work very well. So I'm just going to leave it right there.
Right, roger that. Awesome. Well, thank you very, very much, both of you, for joining us. This has been an excellent, I can't thank you enough for doing this. For everybody that's out there on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, hopefully you enjoyed this as much as I did, because this was an awesome surprise with both Martin and Jake joining us. I want everybody to have a great week. I am traveling next week, so probably I'm going to try to do it at the same time. But if I have to skip a week because I'm with family and I'm doing family things, that might happen. But I will try to get online just to say hi to everybody and let you know what I'm doing. And hopefully I'll have some descriptions of some distilleries that I got to walk through. So that's my goal. Other than that, everybody have a great week. Thank you for joining us for another Cutaway Security ICS Infosec Chat Friday. And take care. All right. Thanks, everybody.